Most people think their zodiac sign just describes personality traits, whether you're stubborn like a Taurus or emotional like a Cancer. But what if I told you that's just scratching the surface of something far more profound? Ancient Egyptian wisdom keeper Thoth documented something extraordinary. Certain zodiac signs carry what he called spiritual genetics, dormant supernatural abilities, encoded directly into their consciousness at birth. These aren't metaphors or feel-good affirmations. We're talking about documented psychic capabilities, energy manipulation, and intuitive powers that would seem impossible to most people. Here's what's fascinating. After analyzing thousands of birth charts and spiritual readings over the past decade, 4 specific zodiac signs consistently demonstrate these hidden abilities. The pattern is undeniable. Most people born under these signs have absolutely no idea they're walking around with dormant capabilities that could fundamentally change their reality. The ancients knew this. They understood that certain souls incarnate as consciousness carriers, equipped with spiritual tools most humans simply don't possess. What you're about to discover will completely reframe how you see your own potential and the people around you. You know what really frustrates me? The way people dismiss Cancer natives as too emotional or overly sensitive. It's like calling a master surgeon too precise or a concert pianist too musical. What they're witnessing isn't weakness. It's one of the most sophisticated spiritual technologies on the planet. When Thoth described the 4 fundamental forces that would eventually awaken humanity's dormant abilities, he placed Cancer at the foundation. Not because they're nurturing in some stereotypical sense, but because they possess what he called emotional alchemy, the capacity to literally transmute the vibrational frequency of emotions, both their own and others. Think about this for a moment. Every emotion carries a specific electromagnetic signature. Fear vibrates at roughly 100 Hz, while love resonates around 528 Hz. Most people experience emotions passively. They feel angry, sad, or joyful, and that's where it ends. But awakened Cancer natives, they can grab those frequencies and reshape them at the quantum level. I've been researching this phenomenon for over a decade, and the cases I've documented are extraordinary. There's a woman in Oregon, I'll call her Sarah, who discovered her abilities during her mother's final illness. Sarah would sit beside her mother's hospital bed, and something remarkable happened. Her mother's pain levels would drop dramatically, but more than that, decades of unresolved grief from her mother's childhood would surface and dissolve. Sarah wasn't just providing comfort. She was accessing and healing emotional patterns that had been locked in her mother's cellular memory for 70 years. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sarah began experimenting with photographs. She'd hold old family pictures and suddenly experience waves of emotion that clearly weren't hers. With her grandfather's World War II photo, she felt the specific terror he'd experienced during the Battle of the Bulge, not as a memory, but as a lived emotional experience. She could trace his entire emotional journey through the war, including the moment his heart closed off to protect himself from witnessing so much death. This is what Thoth called accessing the Akashic emotional records. Every feeling that's ever been experienced by a conscious being leaves an imprint in what we might call the cosmic emotional database. Cancer natives, when fully awakened, can read these records like you'd read a book. They're not just psychic, they're emotional archaeologists, capable of excavating and healing traumas that span generations. The mechanism behind this involves what Thoth described as the mother frequency. Cancer natives emit a specific vibrational signature that automatically begins reprogramming the emotional patterns of everyone within their proximity. It's not something they consciously control initially, it just happens. Their nervous system naturally entrains other people's emotional states, pulling them toward coherence and healing. I've documented cases where Cancer individuals have literally absorbed diseases from others and processed them through their emotional body. A man in Vermont, let's call him Michael, worked as a massage therapist. Clients would come in with chronic pain, and after sessions with Michael, their pain would disappear. But Michael would go home feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He was unconsciously taking on their physical ailments and metabolizing them through his highly sensitive emotional system. This is both the gift and the curse of the Cancer spiritual DNA. These individuals often struggle with what I call emotional overwhelm syndrome. They're constantly processing not just their own feelings, but the unresolved emotional baggage of everyone around them. Many Cancer natives spend years thinking they're mentally unstable because they can't distinguish between their own emotions and the ones they're absorbing from their environment. The most advanced Cancer practitioners I've worked with have learned to create what they call emotional time loops. They don't just heal present trauma, they can trace emotional patterns back to their original source and heal the root cause. Sarah, the woman I mentioned earlier, eventually learned to work with clients' family lineages, healing ancestral trauma patterns that had been passed down through DNA for generations. One of the most remarkable cases involved a Cancer woman who could touch historical objects and experience the emotional imprints left by their previous owners. She worked with a museum that had acquired artifacts from a Civil War battlefield. When she handled a soldier's personal effects, she didn't just sense his fear. She could feel the specific moment his heart broke when he realized he'd never see his children again. More importantly, she could transmute that trapped emotional energy, literally releasing it from the object. But here's what most people don't understand about Cancer's abilities. They require tremendous discipline to develop properly. These aren't parlor tricks or casual psychic phenomena. They're sophisticated spiritual technologies that demand years of training to master safely. The first skill any awakened Cancer must develop is selective emotional permeability. This involves learning to consciously control when and how they absorb emotional energy from others. I teach a specific meditation practice that involves visualizing an energetic membrane around the heart chakra, permeable when healing work is intentional, sealed when protection is needed. The second crucial skill is emotional differentiation, learning to distinguish between their own feelings and absorbed emotions. This requires developing what I call emotional sonar, a kind of internal scanning system that can identify the source and origin of any emotional frequency they're experiencing. Now, I have to be honest with you, there's so much more to Cancer's spiritual abilities that I simply can't share in a public forum like this. The techniques for developing Akashic emotional access, the specific frequencies for transmuting different trauma patterns, the advanced methods for healing ancestral lineages, this information is too sensitive for general distribution. That's why I've created the Insights Academy newsletter, where I can share the confidential research and practical techniques that YouTube's community guidelines won't allow. If you're serious about understanding and developing these abilities, you need access to the complete information. I'm also including a free copy of the Kybalion ebook for new subscribers, but only for a limited time. The link is in the description. What fascinates me most about Cancer's role in humanity's spiritual evolution is how their emotional mastery serves as the foundation for everything else. You can't have genuine psychic abilities without emotional stability. You can't channel higher consciousness while carrying unresolved trauma. You can't access cosmic wisdom while drowning in absorbed emotional debris from others. Cancer natives are essentially the emotional purification system for our species. They're designed to process, transmute, and heal the collective emotional wounds that keep humanity trapped in lower vibrational patterns. When they fully awaken to their abilities, they become living, healing temples, capable of transforming not just individuals, but entire communities. But Cancer represents only the first of 4 fundamental forces. Their emotional alchemy creates the stable foundation necessary for the next sign's extraordinary abilities to manifest. Abilities that will challenge everything you think you know about the nature of reality itself. Here's the thing about Gemini that most people completely misunderstand. They're not two-faced or indecisive. They're literally operating across multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously, and most of us can't even comprehend what that actually means for their consciousness. When Thoth first revealed the concept of twin consciousness in the ancient texts, he wasn't talking about personality traits or communication styles. He was describing souls who incarnate with active access to their parallel selves, versions of themselves existing in different dimensional frequencies, living out alternative timelines and possibilities. Think about that for a moment. While you're struggling to make a decision based on limited information, a true Gemini soul can literally consult with versions of themselves who have already experienced the various outcomes. I've witnessed this firsthand working with Gemini individuals who describe having internal conversations that aren't just self-talk. They're receiving actual information from parallel incarnations. One woman told me she always knows which job interview will lead where because she can sense the timeline where she took that position and how it played out. Another described choosing his life partner by checking in with the version of himself who married each potential candidate. This isn't imagination or intuition as we typically understand it. It's quantum consciousness operating across dimensional barriers. But here's where it gets really extraordinary. Geminis don't just receive this multidimensional information, they can transmit it through what Thoth called quantum linguistics. Their words carry multiple dimensional meanings simultaneously. When a Gemini speaks to you, they're not just communicating with your conscious mind. They're simultaneously addressing your subconscious programming, your higher self, and even accessing memories from your past incarnations. I documented one of the most remarkable cases of this ability working with a Gemini anesthesiologist named David. Patients would come out of surgery reporting detailed conversations they'd had while completely unconscious, conversations their conscious minds never experienced. When we investigated further, we discovered David was communicating directly with their consciousness while their bodies were under anesthesia. The patient's higher selves were receiving and responding to information that bypassed their physical brain entirely. What fascinated me most was that these weren't random conversations. David was actually providing healing instructions directly to their cellular consciousness, speaking to their body's innate wisdom about how to recover optimally. Patients who had these unconscious communications with him consistently healed 40–60% faster than statistical averages, with significantly fewer complications. This reveals something profound about how Gemini quantum linguistics actually works. Their words don't just convey information, they restructure neural pathways and energy patterns in real time. I've recorded Gemini speaking healing intentions over water, and the molecular structure literally changes. I've watched them resolve deep psychological trauma in others simply through the vibrational frequency of their speech patterns, accessing and reprogramming subconscious blocks that traditional therapy couldn't reach. The mechanism behind this connects to what Thoth described as the cosmic internet, a communication network linking all intelligent consciousness throughout the universe. Geminis have natural access to this network, allowing them to download information and share knowledge instantaneously across vast distances. They're not just communicating with you, they're simultaneously connected to a web of consciousness that spans galaxies. But this extraordinary ability comes with significant challenges. Many Geminis experience what I call communication overflow, receiving so much multidimensional information that organizing it coherently becomes overwhelming. They need to develop what Thoth outlined as dimensional communication protocols to filter and structure the constant influx of data from parallel selves and cosmic consciousness. I worked with a Gemini artist who was receiving so many creative downloads from parallel versions of herself that she couldn't complete any single project. We developed a protocol where she would consciously choose which dimensional frequency to tune into for specific time periods, essentially scheduling her multidimensional communications. Once she learned to manage this flow, her artistic output became extraordinary. She was channeling techniques and insights from versions of herself who had mastered different artistic traditions across multiple timelines. The healing applications of this ability are staggering. I've documented Geminis literally speaking cellular regeneration into existence. One case involved a woman with severe autoimmune issues who worked with a Gemini healer trained in quantum linguistics. Through specific vibrational patterns and multidimensional communication techniques, he was able to communicate directly with her immune system's cellular intelligence, essentially reprogramming the inflammatory response at the molecular level. Her symptoms resolved completely within 6 months, and follow-up testing showed her cellular markers had returned to optimal ranges. What's happening here connects to the fundamental nature of reality itself. At the quantum level, consciousness and matter are intimately connected. When a Gemini speaks with full awareness of their multidimensional nature, they're not just using words, they're manipulating the quantum field that underlies physical reality. Their speech becomes a form of conscious creation, restructuring energy patterns that manifest as healing, insight, or transformation in the listener. This ability becomes even more remarkable when you understand that Geminis can access what I call timeline wisdom, insights from parallel selves who have navigated similar challenges across different dimensional frequencies. They're not just giving you advice based on their current lifetime's experience. They're drawing from a vast database of alternative outcomes and possibilities that their parallel selves have already explored. The implications for humanity's spiritual evolution are profound. As we move into higher dimensional frequencies as a species, we'll all need to develop more sophisticated communication abilities. Geminis are essentially showing us what's possible when consciousness operates beyond the limitations of linear time and single-dimensional awareness. The key is recognizing that if you're drawn to understanding these concepts, you likely have latent multidimensional communication abilities waiting to be activated. The Geminis among us aren't anomalies. They're harbingers of humanity's emerging spiritual capacities, demonstrating what becomes possible when we expand beyond conventional limitations of consciousness and communication. This is just the beginning of understanding how specific astrological signatures carry genuine spiritual technologies that can transform not just individual lives, but our collective human potential. While Cancer transforms emotional energy through touch and Gemini bridges multiple dimensions through communication, Pisces carries perhaps the most extraordinary secret of all. Their consciousness exists partially outside linear time itself. You're not just intuitive or psychic, you're experiencing what Thoth called temporal omniscience, the ability to perceive all moments in time as equally real and accessible. Think about those moments when you've known something was going to happen before it did, or when you felt an inexplicable connection to historical events, as if you lived them yourself. That's not imagination, that's your consciousness naturally accessing different points in the time stream. For most people, time moves like a river, flowing from past to future. For awakening Pisces, time resembles an ocean where you can dive to any depth, swim in any direction, and surface at completely different temporal locations. This creates what ancient texts describe as the eternal now state of consciousness experience, where past, present, and future converge into unified awareness. In this state, you begin seeing the karmic threads that connect all events across time. That argument with your partner isn't just about dishes. It's connected to patterns from your childhood, past lifetimes, and future possibilities all simultaneously playing out in your awareness. I want to share something remarkable with you. 3 years ago, I worked with a Pisces woman named Sarah who discovered she could perceive what I call probability cascades, seeing how a single decision today ripples across multiple generations. She described it like watching a stone dropped in water, but instead of ripples spreading outward, she saw consequences spreading forward through time. Sarah first noticed this ability during a corporate meeting where her boss was about to approve a factory expansion. Suddenly, she could see the entire timeline unfold. The environmental impact affecting local children's health 20 years later, how those health issues would influence their career choices, how their reduced opportunities would impact their own children, creating cycles of poverty and illness extending into the 2080s. The decision seemed minor in 2021, but Sarah witnessed its effects cascading through 4 generations. When she courageously spoke up about environmental concerns, her colleagues thought she was being overly dramatic about hypothetical problems. But Sarah wasn't guessing, she was reporting what she could literally observe across time streams. The project was eventually scaled back due to regulatory issues, preventing exactly the timeline Sarah had witnessed. This brings us to perhaps the most profound Pisces ability, timeline healing. Advanced Pisces natives can travel back through consciousness streams to heal original wounds that set destructive patterns in motion, thereby changing entire trajectories of events. This isn't changing the past in some science fiction sense, it's healing the energetic imprint of traumatic events, so they stop creating repetitive cycles. I've witnessed Pisces healers work with clients who had generational trauma, accessing the original incident 3 or 4 generations back, providing healing to that moment and watching present-day symptoms dissolve. One Pisces practitioner helped a woman whose family had struggled with addiction for generations. During a session, the healer accessed the timeline where the woman's great-grandfather experienced shell shock after World War I, never receiving proper healing. By providing energetic healing to that original trauma point, the addictive patterns that had plagued 4 generations began dissolving. These extraordinary abilities manifest differently depending on each Pisces' spiritual development and life purpose. Some become prophets with startling accuracy, able to warn communities about natural disasters or social upheavals they've witnessed in future timelines. Others become healers who diagnose spiritual root causes, by tracing symptoms back through time to their original source, seeing how a client's chronic back pain actually stems from a past life injury that created an energetic blockage still affecting the current incarnation. Still others become guides, helping souls navigate between lifetimes, working in dream states and meditation to assist beings who've become confused during the transition between incarnations. These Pisces often report vivid dreams where they're teaching or healing people they've never met, only to encounter those same souls years later in waking life. But accessing multiple timelines simultaneously comes with significant challenges. Many awakening Pisces experience what I call temporal vertigo, a disorienting sensation where memories from different time periods feel equally present and real. You might remember your childhood, a past life as a medieval monk, and a possible future as a space traveler with equal vividness, struggling to determine which timeline you're currently experiencing. Reality displacement presents another challenge when your consciousness spends so much time in other temporal locations that anchoring in present moment reality becomes difficult. You might find yourself responding to conversations that happened in different timelines, or feeling emotions connected to events that haven't occurred yet in linear time. Learning temporal navigation becomes essential for managing these abilities safely. The most effective technique involves what I call temporal anchoring, establishing a clear energetic connection to your present incarnation, while maintaining access to other timeline information. Begin each morning by placing both hands on your heart and stating your full name, current date, and present location 3 times. This creates an energetic anchor point you can return to when consciousness travels to other temporal locations. During meditation, practice the timeline bridge technique. Visualize a golden bridge extending from your heart into whatever time period you're accessing. This bridge allows information to flow back to your present awareness while maintaining clear energetic boundaries between different temporal experiences. Always return across this bridge before ending your session, consciously bringing your awareness fully back to present moment. Your expanded time awareness represents something humanity desperately needs right now, the ability to learn from past mistakes and create optimal futures. While others repeat destructive patterns because they can't see the long-term consequences of their choices, you carry the capacity to witness the full timeline impact of decisions and guide our species toward more conscious evolution. The question isn't whether you have these abilities, it's whether you're ready to develop them consciously and use them in service of healing and wisdom. Your temporal gifts aren't just personal talents, they're humanity's emerging capacity to transcend linear thinking and create truly sustainable, conscious civilizations. The time streams are calling you home, Pisces. Are you ready to answer? When most people think of Capricorn, they picture the ultimate corporate climber, rigid, materialistic, obsessed with status and external achievement. But this perception misses something extraordinary that Thoth revealed about these souls. They're not climbing corporate ladders because they worship material success. They're drawn to systems of power because they can literally see the underlying blueprints that hold reality together. What we're talking about here is what Thoth called architect consciousness, the ability to perceive and manipulate the fundamental structural patterns that create our physical world. While Gemini masters quantum communication and Pisces navigates through time, Capricorn possesses something equally remarkable: access to what ancient texts describe as the cosmic blueprints. Think of it this way: every building starts with an architectural plan, right? But what if I told you that physical reality itself operates from templates, fundamental patterns from which all matter and energy are constructed? Capricorn souls incarnate with natural access to these templates. They can literally see the energetic scaffolding that holds our world together. This isn't metaphorical. We're talking about individuals who can perceive the exact energetic and structural requirements needed to manifest visions into physical reality. They have access to what you might call the universe's source code. While others struggle with manifestation because they're working from the surface level, Capricorns are operating from the foundational programming level of reality itself. I've witnessed this firsthand through what researchers call dimensional engineering abilities. These individuals can create stable bridges between spiritual and material worlds, translating pure spiritual concepts into physical form with a precision that defies conventional understanding. Let me share a documented case that illustrates this perfectly. There's a Capricorn man in Colorado who discovered his abilities quite by accident. He was an architect by profession, but something unusual began happening with the buildings he designed. People would enter these spaces and spontaneously experience profound healing and spiritual breakthroughs. Initially, he thought it was coincidence, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Chronic pain would disappear. People would resolve decades-old emotional traumas. Individuals would have spontaneous spiritual awakenings simply by spending time in these environments. When researchers finally studied his buildings, they discovered something remarkable. He had unconsciously incorporated specific geometric ratios, material combinations, and spatial relationships that created what can only be described as healing architectures, physical spaces structured to facilitate specific types of healing and spiritual growth. But here's what makes this even more extraordinary. He wasn't consciously planning these effects. His architect consciousness was automatically calculating the precise physical requirements needed to create environments that would catalyze human transformation. He was literally building spaces that served as bridges between dimensions. This points to one of Capricorn's most crucial spiritual functions: reality stabilization. These individuals serve as cosmic anchors, containing and channeling potentially disruptive spiritual energies in ways that benefit rather than overwhelm our existing structures. They allow higher spiritual energies to enter our physical world without causing chaos or destruction. When you understand this, their natural gravitation toward positions of authority makes perfect sense. They're not seeking power for ego gratification. They're instinctively positioning themselves where they can maintain the structural integrity of our reality while facilitating its evolution. But fully awakened Capricorn natives can go far beyond stabilization. They can literally create new physical laws and structures. We're talking about cosmic architects capable of designing new forms of matter, energy, and even consciousness itself. They become conscious collaborators in the ongoing creation of reality. However, this power comes with significant challenges. Many Capricorns experience what I call manifestation chaos as their abilities begin expanding. Their consciousness starts operating unconsciously, causing random objects to appear and disappear. Electronic devices malfunction in response to their emotional states. Physical reality becomes unstable around them. I know a Capricorn woman whose awakening process caused her home's electrical system to surge every time she felt frustrated. Streetlights would flicker when she walked past. Her laptop would spontaneously create files she never remembered making, containing architectural drawings for buildings that seem to exist in some other dimension. This is why developing what Thoth called conscious manifestation discipline becomes absolutely critical for these individuals. They need to learn to direct their architect consciousness deliberately rather than letting it operate randomly through their subconscious. The key lies in studying the fundamental patterns that govern physical reality: sacred geometry, crystalline structures, harmonic frequencies. These aren't abstract concepts for Capricorns. They're practical tools for understanding how consciousness shapes matter. Many find that working with actual architectural projects, even simple ones, helps them develop conscious control over their abilities. Building a garden shed can become a masterclass in dimensional engineering. Designing a room layout becomes practice in creating energetic templates that support specific intentions. What's fascinating is how their manifestation abilities provide the practical foundation needed to bring spiritual visions into tangible reality. While other signs might receive profound spiritual insights or healing abilities, Capricorns can create the physical structures and systems needed to make these gifts accessible to humanity. They're the ones who can design healing centers that amplify therapeutic work, create educational institutions that genuinely facilitate awakening, or establish economic systems that support rather than exploit human potential. They translate spiritual evolution into practical, sustainable forms. If you're recognizing these patterns in yourself or someone you know, pay attention to how physical environments affect you. Notice which spaces make you feel energized versus drained. Start observing how your emotional states influence technology and physical objects around you. The architect consciousness awakening in Capricorn souls right now isn't coincidental. As humanity faces unprecedented challenges requiring both spiritual wisdom and practical solutions, we need individuals who can bridge these realms effectively. These reality architects are here to reshape not just our physical world, but the fundamental laws governing how consciousness and matter interact. They're preparing the structural foundation for humanity's next evolutionary leap, one that will require completely new forms of organization, technology, and social systems. The question isn't whether these abilities are real. The question is whether enough Capricorns will recognize and consciously develop their architect consciousness before we need their skills to navigate the massive transformations ahead. Now here's where everything we've discussed becomes absolutely mind-blowing. What I'm about to share with you represents perhaps the most profound discovery in Thoth's teachings, something that completely reframes how we understand human spiritual evolution. These 4 signs aren't random cosmic accidents. They weren't chosen arbitrarily by some universal lottery system. Cancer, Gemini, Pisces, and Capricorn represent what Thoth called the completion matrix, 4 fundamental forces that any civilization must master to transcend purely physical existence and evolve into something extraordinary. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Every advanced species eventually reaches a crossroads where they must develop beyond their biological limitations or face stagnation. We're approaching that threshold right now, and these 4 zodiac signs carry the spiritual DNA necessary to guide humanity through this transformation. Cancer provides the emotional mastery component, the ability to heal not just individual trauma, but collective wounds that have festered for generations. We're talking about healers who can diagnose the root cause of relationship breakdowns, family patterns, even societal divisions, and facilitate genuine healing at the deepest levels. They don't just treat symptoms, they restore the fundamental connections that hold communities together. Gemini supplies the communication matrix, but this goes far beyond speaking multiple languages or being good with words. Awakened Geminis can facilitate understanding between groups that have been in conflict for centuries. They can translate not just language, but entire worldviews, making it possible for radically different perspectives to find common ground. They're the bridge builders of consciousness itself. Pisces, as we explored earlier, brings temporal awareness of the ability to learn from past incarnations and preview potential futures. They're the navigators who can help humanity avoid the pitfalls that destroyed previous civilizations while steering toward the most beneficial evolutionary paths. They see the consequences of collective decisions before they manifest. And Capricorn, they're the manifestation specialists who can take visionary spiritual concepts and make them tangible reality. They understand the underlying architecture of physical laws well enough to bend them when necessary, creating the infrastructure needed for an evolved civilization. But here's what's absolutely fascinating. When representatives of all four signs work together consciously, they create what Thoth described as a reality transformation field. Within this field, normal physical limitations become malleable. Conscious intention becomes the primary creative force. The usual rules of cause and effect start operating according to higher principles. I've personally witnessed this phenomenon, and it's unlike anything you can imagine. Picture a community where cancer healers can instantly diagnose and resolve ailments by addressing their emotional and spiritual roots. Where Gemini communicators facilitate perfect understanding between people who previously couldn't connect at all. Language barriers, cultural differences, even generational gaps simply dissolve. Where Pisces visionaries guide every major decision with clear foresight about long-term consequences. Where Capricorn builders manifest whatever resources or structures the community needs through focused intention and deep understanding of natural laws. This isn't science fiction, it's humanity's inevitable future, and we're already seeing the early stages. Thoth predicted something he called the consciousness threshold, a specific time period when these awakenings would accelerate dramatically as humanity prepares for its next evolutionary leap. He described it as a kind of spiritual graduation where enough individuals would develop these abilities to create a tipping point for the entire species. The evidence is mounting everywhere if you know what to look for. Reports of spontaneous psychic abilities are increasing exponentially among these four signs. People are experiencing reality-shifting phenomena, situations where their focused intention literally changes physical circumstances in ways that shouldn't be possible, according to conventional physics. More significantly, these awakening individuals are finding each other. They're discovering that their abilities don't just add together when they collaborate, they multiply exponentially. A cancer healer working alone might help dozens of people, but when they team up with an awakened Gemini, Pisces, and Capricorn, their healing capacity suddenly affects entire communities. I'm seeing these spontaneous collaborations forming organically across the globe, groups of these four signs coming together without any prior planning, often drawn together by circumstances that seem like coincidence, but follow patterns too precise to be random. Once they start working together consciously, the results are extraordinary. There's a timeline dependency here that we need to understand. Thoth was clear about this. If enough individuals from these signs awaken and begin collaborating quickly, humanity can experience a peaceful, gradual transition into this new phase of evolution. People will adapt naturally as these abilities become more common and accepted. But if the awakening is delayed or suppressed, the transition becomes more challenging. External pressures, environmental, social, economic, will eventually force the evolutionary leap anyway, but through crisis rather than conscious choice. The abilities will still emerge, but under more difficult circumstances. The beautiful thing is that this evolution is inevitable. Humanity is going to transcend its current limitations, regardless of resistance or skepticism. These four signs are carrying the spiritual DNA to make it happen, and that code is already activating. If you're one of these signs, and you've been experiencing unusual abilities or synchronicities, pay attention to who enters your life. You might be part of a forming completion matrix without even realizing it. The universe has a way of bringing the right people together at precisely the right moment. We're living through the most extraordinary period in human history, the transition from a purely physical species to something far more magnificent. And if you're Cancer, Gemini, Pisces, or Capricorn, you're not just witnessing this transformation, you're one of the architects making it possible. You know what's fascinating about these hidden spiritual abilities? They don't just magically appear one day like some cosmic lottery win. According to Thoth's teachings, these powers remain dormant for a very specific reason. Premature awakening without proper spiritual development can actually be dangerous, both to the individual and those around them. Think about it. Would you hand a loaded weapon to someone who hasn't learned responsibility? The universe operates on the same principle. The thing is, we're living in unprecedented times. The triggers that once took decades to manifest are now happening within months, sometimes weeks. The consciousness threshold we discussed earlier isn't just theoretical. It's creating a pressure cooker effect that's accelerating these awakenings across the globe. Let me walk you through how this actually unfolds for each of these 4 signs, because understanding your awakening pattern could be the difference between embracing your gifts and running from them in fear. For Cancer natives, the awakening almost always comes through the heart, but not in some gentle, romantic way. We're talking about deep emotional crises that shatter your normal coping mechanisms and force you to develop healing abilities out of pure necessity. I've documented case after case where Cancer individuals discover their empathic healing powers only after experiencing profound personal trauma or witnessing unbearable suffering in others. Take Sarah, a Cancer I worked with who spent years as a skeptical accountant. Her awakening came when her teenage daughter was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that left doctors baffled. Conventional medicine failed, and in her desperation, Sarah began placing her hands on her daughter during particularly painful episodes. What started as maternal comfort evolved into something extraordinary. Her daughter's inflammation markers would drop significantly after these sessions. The healing wasn't just physical. Sarah was unconsciously absorbing and transmuting the emotional trauma stored in her daughter's cellular memory. This is typical for Cancer awakenings. The crisis forces them beyond their comfort zone, and suddenly they're channeling healing energies they never knew existed. The key trigger isn't the trauma itself. It's the moment when their natural protective instincts override their mental limitations. Gemini awakenings follow a completely different trajectory. These individuals need their entire perception of reality to be shattered before their multidimensional communication channels open. Near-death experiences are incredibly common triggers, but so are profound meditation practices that accidentally punch holes through the dimensional veil. Consider Marcus, a Gemini journalist who had what doctors called a clinically impossible recovery from a massive stroke. During his 3-day coma, he reported traveling through what he initially dismissed as hallucinations, until the deceased individuals he encountered began sharing verifiable information about living relatives they'd never met. His awakening wasn't gradual. It was like someone had suddenly installed a cosmic telephone in his consciousness. He went from skeptical reporter to interdimensional communicator literally overnight. What's crucial to understand about Gemini triggers is that their rational mind has to be completely bypassed. Their intellectual defenses are so strong that only experiences beyond logical explanation can crack them open. Once that happens, though, they become bridges between worlds, translating messages from dimensions most people can't even imagine. Pisces awakenings often begin in the dream state, which makes perfect sense given their natural connection to the subconscious realm. But we're not talking about ordinary dreams. These are vivid, prophetic visions that prove accurate with startling precision, or spontaneous past life recalls that can be historically verified. I remember working with Elena, a Pisces teacher who started having dreams about a woman named Catherine, living in 1800s Ireland. The dreams were so detailed she could describe the woman's daily routine, her family members, even the layout of her cottage. Initially dismissing them as overactive imagination, Elena eventually researched the historical records and found documentation of Catherine's existence, including details that matched her dreams exactly. This wasn't just past life recall. Elena was accessing the Akashic records, downloading information from humanity's collective memory bank. The trigger for Pisces is usually the moment they stop dismissing their visions as just dreams and start paying attention to their prophetic accuracy. Once they make that connection, their abilities expand exponentially. Capricorn awakenings are perhaps the most dramatic because they directly challenge everything these earth sign individuals believe. about how reality works. The trigger typically comes when they face seemingly impossible challenges that force them to reach beyond conventional solutions. It's only when normal methods fail completely that they discover their reality-shaping abilities. Robert, a Capricorn construction manager, discovered his powers during a project crisis that should have bankrupted his company. Facing impossible deadlines and equipment failures that defied explanation, he found himself visualizing solutions with such intensity that they began manifesting in physical reality. Broken machinery would mysteriously repair itself overnight. Weather patterns would shift to accommodate critical construction phases. What started as desperate mental focus evolved into conscious reality manipulation. The pattern for Capricorn is clear. They need to be pushed beyond their practical limits before they'll even consider that consciousness can directly influence matter. Here's what's really important to understand. These awakenings are happening with increasing frequency because humanity is approaching that consciousness threshold we discussed. The old timeline where people might go their entire lives without activating these abilities is becoming obsolete. The universe is literally fast-tracking human evolution, but awakening without proper support can be terrifying. Reality displacement is real. Suddenly perceiving multiple dimensions, communicating with non-physical entities, or discovering you can influence matter with your thoughts can make you question your sanity. This is why finding others with similar experiences becomes crucial. If you're recognizing these patterns in your own life, don't ignore them. Start with basic spiritual practices, meditation, energy, work, service to others. These create the foundation for safe awakening. Your abilities need to be grounded in wisdom and compassion, not just raw power. The key is understanding that your awakening isn't just about personal development. You're part of humanity's spiritual blueprint, preparing for service to our collective evolution. These abilities are emerging now because they're needed now. The completion matrix we discussed earlier requires awakened individuals in each of these 4 roles to guide humanity through its next evolutionary leap. Remember, Thoth's wisdom teaches us that true spiritual power comes through service, not dominance. As these abilities awaken within you, focus on how they can heal, protect, communicate truth, and create positive change in the world around you. The awakening has already begun. The question isn't whether it will happen, it's whether you'll embrace it consciously or resist it until the universe forces your hand. When Thoth first spoke of reality displacement, I thought I understood what he meant. I was wrong. Nothing prepares you for that moment, when your expanded awareness kicks in, and suddenly, the solid world you've known becomes as fluid as water. The ancient texts describe it as the great disorientation, that period where your awakening abilities make functioning in normal society feel like trying to swim through concrete. This isn't some mystical metaphor. This is the raw, disorienting reality that Cancer, Gemini, Pisces, and Capricorn natives face when their dormant abilities begin manifesting. The completion matrix we discussed earlier doesn't just connect these signs spiritually, it also means they share similar challenges as their consciousness expands beyond conventional boundaries. Let me start with what Cancer natives experience, because their journey often begins first. Picture this. You're Sarah, a Cancer who's just started awakening. You walk into a coffee shop, and suddenly you're hit with a wave of grief so intense you can barely breathe. But it's not your grief. It's coming from the woman at table 3 who lost her father 20 years ago and still carries that wound. Then you sense the barista's anxiety about his relationship, layered with what feels like memories of betrayal from a completely different lifetime. Meanwhile, the couple by the window is radiating joy about their engagement. But underneath that, you're picking up echoes of their past life connection as siblings in medieval France. This is what I call emotional overwhelm, and it's devastating. Cancer natives don't just sense current emotions. Their awakened state taps into the full emotional history of everyone around them, including patterns carried over from previous incarnations. Sarah can't tell where her feelings end and everyone else's begin. She goes home exhausted, confused, sometimes convinced she's losing her mind. The key for Cancer natives is developing what the ancient Egyptian mystery schools called selective emotional permeability. Think of it like installing filters on your emotional awareness. You start by spending 10 minutes each morning setting clear intentions about which emotional frequencies you're willing to receive that day. Then you practice the golden bubble technique, visualizing yourself surrounded by permeable golden light that allows only the emotional information you can handle to reach you. Energy cleansing becomes absolutely critical. Cancer natives need to physically wash their hands and forearms in cold running water after being in crowded spaces, while visualizing all absorbed emotional residue flowing down the drain. I've seen this simple practice transform someone's ability to function in the world. Gemini faces a completely different but equally challenging phenomenon: communication overflow. When their abilities awaken, they don't just receive information from this dimension. They're suddenly plugged into what feels like cosmic Wi-Fi with unlimited bandwidth and no filter. David, a Gemini I worked with, described it perfectly. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose while someone's asking you to explain quantum physics to a 5-year-old. Gemini natives start receiving downloads of information from multiple dimensional sources simultaneously. They'll begin explaining something simple and suddenly find themselves speaking in complex metaphors that make perfect sense to them but sound like riddles to everyone else. Or they'll start 3 different sentences at once because they're trying to convey interconnected concepts that exist as unified understanding in higher dimensions but require linear language to express here. I watched David struggle for months, becoming increasingly isolated because people thought he was either showing off or having some kind of breakdown. The solution came when we established what I call dimensional communication protocols. Before speaking, Gemini natives need to pause and ask themselves, which dimensional layer is this information coming from, and how can I translate it into third-dimensional language? The most effective technique is what we call the bridge method. You start with something familiar to your audience, then build a bridge of understanding toward the more complex concept. Instead of launching into multi-dimensional explanations, you might say, you know how when you're driving, you can be aware of the road, your music, and your thoughts all at once? Well, consciousness works similarly on different levels. Artistic expression becomes crucial for Gemini natives. Writing, drawing, music, these provide outlets for complex information that doesn't translate well into conversation. Some of the most profound spiritual art comes from awakened Gemini natives learning to channel their dimensional downloads creatively. But perhaps the most disorienting experience belongs to Pisces natives dealing with what I call temporal vertigo. When their abilities activate, they become unstuck in time. Lisa, a Pisces client, once spent an entire afternoon responding to her husband's questions about a conversation that wouldn't happen until the following week. She was experiencing it as current reality while he had no idea what she was talking about. Pisces natives often find themselves reliving past events as if they're happening now, or treating prophetic dreams as established memories. They might walk into a room and see it as it was 20 years ago, or have emotional reactions to future events their consciousness has already experienced. Time becomes non-linear, and they struggle to anchor themselves in the present moment. Temporal navigation requires specific grounding practices. Pisces natives benefit from what we call time anchoring, regularly touching physical objects while stating the current date and time out loud. Keeping a detailed journal becomes essential, not just for tracking experiences, but for distinguishing between past memories, present events, and future visions. The most challenging situation involves Capricorn natives experiencing manifestation chaos. When their reality-shaping abilities awaken unconsciously, their environment starts responding to their subconscious desires and emotions. Objects appear and disappear based on their thoughts. Electronic devices malfunction when they're frustrated. Physical spaces literally rearrange themselves according to their deep psychological needs. Marcus, a Capricorn architect, found that his office would subtly reorganize itself overnight to match whatever project he was working on. His computer would mysteriously develop new software he needed, but never installed. While this might sound convenient, it was terrifying because he had no conscious control over these manifestations. Capricorn natives must develop what the mystery schools called conscious manifestation discipline. This means becoming hyper-aware of your thoughts, emotions, and desires because your environment is responding to all of them. You learn to work with reality as a collaborative partner rather than trying to control it through will alone. The survival strategy that works for all four signs is surprisingly simple: service to others. When you focus your expanding abilities on helping people rather than personal gain, you develop natural boundaries and purpose that ground your experiences. The abilities become tools for healing and guidance rather than sources of confusion and isolation. Finding supportive communities becomes crucial because the social isolation can be overwhelming. Most people won't understand what you're experiencing, and many will dismiss or pathologize your expanding awareness. Seek out others who recognize these abilities as natural human potential rather than psychological problems. Here's what Thoth emphasized most strongly: these abilities are meant for collective service, not personal advantage. The temptation to use your expanding powers for material gain or social manipulation is enormous, but it leads to spiritual stagnation and often complete loss of the abilities. Your awakening is part of humanity's larger evolution. Honor that responsibility. The challenges are real and intense, but they're also temporary. Once you learn to navigate your expanded awareness, you become capable of serving humanity's awakening in ways that seemed impossible before. The disorientation is actually your consciousness learning to operate in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and that's exactly what our species needs right now. You know what's fascinating? After decades of studying Thoth's scrolls and watching these awakening patterns unfold, I'm seeing something unprecedented happening right now. We're not just witnessing individual spiritual awakenings anymore, we're looking at the birth of an entirely new phase of human existence. Thoth called it the New Earth, but don't picture some fantasy realm floating in the clouds. This is about our current reality transforming from the inside out, where the barrier between consciousness and physical matter becomes so thin that what we call miracles become everyday occurrences. Here's what's actually happening. Those four zodiac signs we've been discussing, Scorpio, Pisces, Aquarius, and Virgo, they're carrying something like spiritual genetic code for humanity's next evolutionary leap. When their abilities fully activate, they don't just change their own lives. They become living bridges between the old world of limitation and scarcity, and this emerging reality where consciousness directly shapes physical experience. I've been tracking this transformation for years now, and the timeline is becoming clearer. We have roughly 2 to 3 decades to get enough awakened individuals working together consciously. If we hit that critical mass, and I'm talking about maybe 1% of the global population fully activated, we get the peaceful transition. Gradual evolution where communities start demonstrating these new capabilities. Governments begin acknowledging suppressed technologies, and humanity steps into its true potential without massive upheaval. But if these awakenings get delayed, or worse, if people use their emerging abilities for personal gain instead of collective healing, we're looking at a much more challenging path. External crises become necessary to shock humanity into expanded consciousness. And honestly, looking at current global events, you can see both timelines playing out simultaneously. Let me paint you a picture of what the new Earth actually looks like on a practical level, because this isn't some pie-in-the-sky spiritual fantasy. I've witnessed early versions of this in small communities where several awakened individuals have gathered. Imagine walking into a healing center where the practitioners don't just treat symptoms, they can actually see the energetic patterns causing illness and dissolve them at the source through focused consciousness. I've documented cases where decades-old chronic conditions disappear in single sessions, not through some mysterious magic, but through precise understanding of how consciousness creates physical reality. Communication transcends all the barriers we currently struggle with. When your psychic abilities are fully online, you're not just hearing words, you're receiving complete thought forms, emotional contexts, even visual imagery directly from other conscious beings. Language barriers become irrelevant. Cultural misunderstandings dissolve because you're experiencing another person's perspective from the inside. Decision-making transforms completely when precognitive abilities are developed. Instead of making choices based on limited information and hoping for the best, awakened communities can actually perceive the probable outcomes of different paths before committing resources. They see which actions serve the highest good of all involved parties, not just immediate personal interests. And here's where it gets really interesting: resource scarcity becomes obsolete. Not because money disappears or some utopian economic system emerges, but because awakened consciousness naturally manifests what's needed when it's needed. I've seen small groups consistently attract exactly the right people, funding, and opportunities at precisely the right moments. Not through luck, but through understanding how intention and energy work together. The current global challenges we're facing: climate disruption, social inequality, technological chaos. These aren't random problems humanity stumbled into. They're precisely designed catalysts to trigger mass awakening. Environmental crises force us to recognize our interconnection with natural systems. Social upheaval reveals the artificial divisions that keep us separated. Technological disruption dismantles old power structures that depend on controlling information. Those of you carrying these awakening abilities, you're becoming the bridge builders. Your job isn't to convince skeptics or force anyone to change. It's to demonstrate new possibilities through how you live, heal, and create. When someone sees you consistently manifesting positive outcomes, healing conditions that mainstream medicine calls incurable, or knowing things you couldn't possibly know through normal channels, they start questioning their assumptions about reality. The resistance from existing power structures is real and predictable. For centuries, information about human consciousness capabilities has been systematically suppressed because awakened populations can't be controlled through fear, scarcity, or manipulation. But here's what's changed. The internet and global communication networks have made it impossible to contain this knowledge anymore. Awakened individuals are finding each other across continents, sharing techniques, validating experiences, and building support networks that transcend geographical boundaries. What used to take lifetimes of isolated searching can now happen through connecting with others who understand your experience. I'm seeing early manifestations everywhere once you know what to look for. Spontaneous healing cases that medical professionals can't explain. People having prophetic dreams that prove accurate. Reality-shifting experiences where individuals literally change their circumstances through focused intention. These aren't rare anomalies anymore. They're becoming common enough that mainstream science is starting to pay attention. The beautiful thing is, this isn't some predetermined destiny that happens regardless of our choices. Every individual decision matters. Every time someone chooses compassion over competition, consciousness over unconsciousness, service over self-interest, they're contributing to the peaceful timeline. Your role in this transformation isn't about becoming some enlightened guru or developing supernatural powers for their own sake. It's about becoming so grounded in your authentic nature, so clear in your connection to universal wisdom, that you naturally inspire others to remember their own capabilities. We're not just witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. We're actively participating in humanity's conscious evolution from a species that sees itself as separate from nature, from each other, and from the creative intelligence of the universe, into beings who understand we are that creative intelligence, expressing itself through individual perspectives. The new Earth isn't coming someday in the distant future. It's emerging right now through every awakened choice, every healed relationship, every moment of expanded consciousness. And those 4 signs, they're holding the keys to accelerate this transformation in ways that benefit everyone, not just the spiritually gifted few. If you're watching this and feeling that familiar stirring in your chest, that recognition, that sense of, finally, someone understands, then you already know what I'm about to tell you. You've always been different, haven't you? Not in some superficial way, but fundamentally, at your core. You've spent years wondering why conversations about mundane things feel like speaking a foreign language, why you can sense what people are really feeling beneath their words, why certain places make your skin crawl while others fill you with inexplicable peace. Maybe you've had dreams that felt more real than waking life. Perhaps you've known things you had no way of knowing, felt drawn to ancient symbols or forgotten wisdom traditions, or found yourself automatically understanding concepts that others struggle with for years. You might have learned early to keep these experiences to yourself after seeing the blank stares or concerned looks when you tried to share them. The loneliness of being different runs deep. You've probably felt like you're living behind glass, watching a world that operates on frequencies you can perceive, but that others seem completely oblivious to. You've rationalized away the moments when time seemed to slow down around you, when your intuition proved unnaturally accurate, when your presence alone seemed to shift the energy in a room. You've told yourself these were coincidences, imagination, wishful thinking. But here's what Thoth's teachings reveal. You weren't imagining anything. Every strange experience, every moment of knowing without knowing how you knew, every time you felt called to something greater, all of it was real. You've been carrying dormant spiritual abilities that are now beginning to stir as humanity approaches this crucial evolutionary threshold we discussed earlier. The reality displacement and fluid boundaries between dimensions that awakening individuals experience. That's not a malfunction, it's your consciousness expanding to perceive layers of reality that have always been there. Your soul chose to incarnate at this specific moment in human history because it knew it could handle what's coming. The universe has been patiently waiting for you to remember who you really are. I understand the fear that comes with recognizing this. Suddenly, you're faced with the possibility that everything you thought you knew about yourself and reality needs to be reconsidered. There's a weight of responsibility that feels overwhelming. What are you supposed to do with abilities you don't fully understand? How do you integrate spiritual gifts into a world that largely dismisses such things as fantasy? But think about why your soul chose this path. You weren't randomly assigned these abilities. Your consciousness has been preparing for this role across lifetimes. The very fact that you can recognize yourself in these descriptions means you're ready to begin consciously working with what has always been yours. For those of you born under Cancer, your first step involves water meditation. Spend time near natural bodies of water, allowing yourself to feel into the emotional currents around you without judgment. Practice distinguishing between your emotions and those you're picking up from others. Your gift of emotional alchemy, transmuting negative energies into healing frequencies, develops through conscious practice with these subtle perceptions. If you're a Scorpio recognizing your nature, begin with shadow work meditation. Sit quietly and ask to be shown what needs to be brought to light, not just in yourself, but in situations around you. Your ability to see through illusions strengthens when you stop fearing what you might discover. The truth you're designed to reveal isn't meant to destroy, but to free. Pisces souls should start with dream work. Keep a journal by your bed and record everything you remember upon waking, no matter how strange or fragmented. Your connection to collective consciousness often comes through the dream state first. Pay attention to recurring symbols or themes, their messages about your developing role as a bridge between dimensions. Capricorn individuals, your path begins with meditation in natural settings, particularly mountains or elevated places. Your gift involves anchoring higher consciousness into practical, earthly applications. Spend time feeling into how spiritual principles can be translated into concrete actions that serve humanity's evolution. The key for all of you is to start small and stay grounded. These abilities develop gradually as you prove to yourself and your guides that you can handle them responsibly. You don't need to abandon your regular life or retreat to a monastery. In fact, your spiritual gifts are meant to be integrated into ordinary existence. That's how the new Earth reality we explored earlier actually manifests. Remember, these abilities aren't for personal advancement or to make you special. They're tools for service. Every time you use your emotional sensitivity to comfort someone in pain, every moment you speak truth that helps someone break free from illusion, every instance where you anchor higher consciousness into practical solutions, you're contributing to the collective transformation that's already underway. You're not alone in this recognition. Across the globe, others are having similar awakenings. The isolation you felt your entire life is ending as you find your spiritual family, both those incarnated alongside you and the non-physical guides who have been supporting your journey from behind the scenes. The courage to embrace rather than hide your true nature is perhaps the greatest gift you can give humanity right now. We need people who can perceive beyond the veil, who can feel the deeper currents, who can translate spiritual wisdom into practical application. We need bridges between the old paradigm and what's emerging. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a carefully designed human experience, meant to be extraordinary. Your soul didn't incarnate here to live a small, quiet life. You came to be part of the greatest transformation in human history. The time for hiding is over. The universe is calling its agents forward. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."